Hey everyone, welcome to my talk. So today I'm going to be talking about how to find a bug from like invitation to bounty. And I'm going to be talking a lot of like general advice here, but I'm also going to be talking a lot about my personal experiences. So I really want to make it clear that this is like based off my own experience in bug hunting. What works for me won't necessarily work for you, but I think there's some good general advice here. We're going to cover the entire range of bug bounty today. So let's kind of set the scene. You've just got a private invite. You are ready to hack, right? You are down for it. You accept it. You get all excited. You block out some time to hack. Or maybe you haven't got a private invite yet. And in fact, you're just looking at a public program and you've just blocked out some time. Maybe you've got a weekend to hack. But then it kind of dawns on you. What do you do next? Like, how do you actually hack this? Like, how do you actually get a bounty? Like, how do you go from, I'm going to hack this thing, to, I've hacked this thing and they are giving me money? And if you felt that way, you really wouldn't be alone. I think a lot of people really struggle with that. And today I'm going to be talking about kind of my methodology to the way I hack. Now, if I was like a D&D character, I'd make myself like chaotic neutral. It's very much chaotic. This may not work for you. But my general methodology is to first figure out what the application or a feature does. So very much focusing on the business logic side. Press every button. Like, I don't do a complex recon. I don't have a lot of scripts running. I use only one or two tools. And I just click every button. And finally, I identify those interesting endpoints and I test them for likely vulnerabilities. And I've said this before, but it's worth repeating again that using other people's methodologies, they won't necessarily work for you unless you adapt it to your background. Some people are really recon heavy. They have a really strong, bash scripting skills or programming skills, and they come in with like a bunch of tools or sometimes custom built tools, and they really go deep. But some people like me, I don't really like recon. My background is in programming, but I used to be a web developer. Like, I used to be making these applications, not hacking them. So for someone like me, I really like to focus on the business logic side of things. I think to myself, if I had made this, how would I have done it wrong? It's a difficult subject, though. I know a lot of people really want to see what a successful methodology looks like. And really, you'll figure out what works for you in time. It takes experience. And I think this is something that everyone should take away from this talk, is that all of this requires experience. You just need to practice. You need to, do CTFs, actually hack things and try, and then you'll see what works for you and what doesn't. So the very first step after you get your invite is first to read the rules and information about the program. So when we think about, hacking, quite often the first thing I do is I'm saying, okay, what's in scope? Because knowing that scope argument right up front is really, really, really good. Now, what some people will suggest is downloading like burp configuration files, which are really useful, and some platforms do offer that. But actually, by looking at the rules instead, and actually going through and looking at the in-scope items, you have a better sense of the scope. And the other really cool thing is a lot of platforms and customers will actually have like vulnerabilities they're looking for. So they'll tell you what they want you to find and what they think the criticality is. And that's really important because you can see a lot of like targets where actually something like an RCE may not be that big of a deal to them, but actually IDOR might be a lot more of a big deal. Note that criticality is rarely just on like the vulnerability itself, but also the context surrounding it. So that's what I like to do. I like to go there, go through the out of scope issues. I don't tend to hunt for low vulnerabilities. Just in general. So I don't really find I'm hitting out of scopes very often in terms of like out of scope vulnerabilities rather than out of scope domains. So I don't necessarily feel like I have to read all of that because they tend to be the same few vulnerabilities. But when it comes to like the in-scope domains, I'm really looking at that. One cool thing that I've seen on some platforms and some programs is they have like tiers of targets. So like their mobile apps will be really high tiers and they'll get a automatic bonus to them. I really like saying that. The other thing I take some time to do here is actually look at the statistics. Now, all the platforms provide some form of statistics. And by looking at those statistics, I'm asking myself, is this company active? Is this something I'm going to hear back from soon? Has it just launched? Has it been established for a while? And those will all subtly change the way I approach my hacking. But fundamentally, what should you be looking for in terms of programs? I think you want a friendly and responsive team. You don't want to be waiting months to hear back from a team. So I'm really looking for ones which have are really active. I actually really like friendly teams. There's so many bug bounty programs which are super active on social media, really encouraging people. And they tend to be kind of live hacking event type programs. But anytime I see one of those, I know the team's friendly. I know they're going to really take their time. They have a good reputation in the space. All of that's really useful information. I like to look for a large enough scope that I can pivot when I'm struggling. So when I'm having a hard time and I don't feel like I can find anything, it can make it feel quite constricting to be in the current scope. And it can kind of almost push you to kind of go, okay, I'll go out of scope then. Now, with that, I think it's useful to have something you can pivot to instead. So if you have application 1 and application 2, you can pivot from one application to another when you're struggling. But it's not so interconnected that these are like two very interconnected applications or two functions of the same application. But instead, they're like two big things that you can do. Think about something like Google. You have Gmail, you have Google Drive. They're part of Google as a whole, but they're not so interconnected that they're basically part of the same application. A team that's interested in the type of bugs you can find and you generate impact with. So if you are looking for idols, hack a team that's interested in finding idols. Like, there's no point if they've got idols in out of scope or idols in their low. And finally, I think it's really important to have an interesting attack surface. So that's something that interests you. Maybe it's a target you're interested in. Maybe it's just because, the bounties are high or something like that. And then things you decide here, play to your strengths. Are you good at mobile, web, source code? And really, it's up to you whether you do a public or a private program. As much as this is called invitation to bounty, this totally applies to public programs as well. So the scope size. The scope is the things you can hack against. Larger scope means more things to hack on. That means a large attack area. There's a lot of low-hanging bugs, and I say low-hanging bugs here as kind of stuff that should have been noticed a while ago. If you have a large attack area, you've just got simply more of those, like by the process of statistics. You've got one of those in each product and you've got 10 products. Well, there's 10 more than if you only had one product in scope. Now, smaller scope programs are often sometimes ignored because people think that large scope is easier. But when that large scope is really interwoven, like they use the same credentials, they're always talking to one another, it can be really hard to understand it. And certainly with scope size, if it's just the same product on multiple domains because it's for different regions and they have different languages, that's still a small scope program. I personally prefer a larger scope, but only to ones where I can pivot. If it's just like a bunch of domains that have nothing to do with each other, I'm not really interested in that. So my second step here is, what does it do? I'm really trying to understand what this actually is doing and ask myself the question, do I really want to hack this? And here we have an example of Brussels Airlines. So they have this crew for crew program. So I'm looking at this and I'm having a look at it. Is there some user interaction? Is it a popular application to hack, right? I have to infer some of that, as in look at the latest contributors, look at the leaderboard, and then make the kind of call there. But you can see here that triage in 2 days, time to decide, so the customer coming back 3 weeks. Bit longer than I would like, a little bit, but it happens. I'm also looking for like a match to my skills. So I'm going to talk a bit about what vulnerabilities I look for. But my skills are primarily in API hacking and complex permission hierarchies. I'm really somebody who enjoys testing the kind of products I used to build. So quite a lot of the bugs I find are stuff I used to make when I was a developer. And this kind of took us on to Recon. Now, my Recon isn't running tools. Mine is finding an FAQ and support website. So it's not really traditional recon. I'm not necessarily trying to understand the attack surface, like what's there. I'm trying to understand how it's supposed to work. Because quite often, especially if you do a lot of private invites like I do nowadays, you just kind of get thrown in the middle of a random application. It's like, okay, I don't know what this is. I don't know how to use this. I don't know what their target market is. So quite often I spend the first 3 hours just clicking buttons and trying to understand what it's supposed to do, and what I think, might be critical about it, what I think, kind of thinking about what it is. So for example, if it's a form and I don't know where the form's being sent, I'm going to try and do something like a blind XSS. But if it's like one of those applications which are designed to run JavaScript to show you how to write JavaScript, it's a non-issue, right? It's sandboxed, it's designed to do it. And that kind of informs my attacks that I use later, right? I look at my recon as part of that general situation. And then with that, it's really about playing around. So I'm going to make a lot of requests here. I'm going to be labeling them. And I kind of create this weird workspace. I couldn't find the screenshot of one of my really big projects where I had a ton of repeater tabs that were all labeled. So I just mocked this one up quickly. And you can kind of see how it works here, that when I interact with the web page, I can see what the response is and the request. I will just send it to repeater and just give it a title. I'm not necessarily going to be testing that one. I just want to keep it in mind. I really wish Burp had a better way of having a workspace where you can kind of map functionality like this, but I just use repeater tabs to do it. And if I need to repeat a request, you can actually repeat a request from repeater by just right-clicking on it. Now, I'll also get one of these dud requests, to JavaScript, for example, where it's not necessarily something I'm testing, and then just turn that into a separator. And when I'm dealing with complex business logic, I'll have step 1, register, or maybe step 1, put it into your cart. Step 2, checkout. Step 3 is add a coupon code. Step 4 is whatever. And it goes on. And I end up with this workspace of every single function mapped to a request. And that kind of informs the next part, which is my plan of attack. I'm really asking myself, what of those individual requests I'm actually going to target? So I'm looking at the requests, I'm looking at the kind of high level overview, and I'm thinking, okay, practically, what am I going to test? How do these mesh with the vulnerabilities that I personally look for? I'm testing an API, for example. I'm dealing with a really large RESTful API where it has a lot of requests and it's very overwhelming. This can really help bring it down to a human understandable level. And I do this quite quickly because when I get a private invite, and again, I mainly hack private programs these days, I don't want to go down a dead end for too long because I'm actively trying to avoid duplicates. Now, I think when you get started, duplicates are they just happen, right? Everyone gets dupes. I've gotten dupes. Some of the pros you look up to have gotten dupes. We've all gotten dupes. There's not one person who can probably say that they've never got a duplicate unless they're doing security research rather than bug bounty hunting and finding new vulnerabilities. So quite often what I'm doing here is very quickly figuring out, okay, is this a dead end? Is this a waste of my time, right? So I'm very quickly kind of going through everything. And my very technical recon is hamburger menus. Hamburger menus have genuinely found me so many bugs because I'm trying to hit functionality that nobody else has hit before. So I end up going into some really awkward settings and checking the permissions there. And with the kind of system I have of very quickly going through things, when I'm looking at hamburger menus and looking at the bug in front of me, I'm going, okay, right, is this likely to be tested? Probably not. Okay, is this likely to have a bug? Yes. Okay, that's worth my time. And I'm also going into other menus as well. I'm really trying to find that unique functionality. So I was hacking something recently and it doesn't really matter what it was, but I'm going to change the situation anyway. It was a banking app. And the idea of it, like, a banking app, what are you going to test? Well, withdrawals, deposits, you might test for, can you cancel payments, stuff like that. A banking app, payments. It's the obvious connection there, right? It is the obvious kind of, this would be critical if I found it. But it's kind of the obvious one, right? Like, everyone's going to be looking for those kind of vulnerabilities. And certainly it's worth doing it. And it's certainly something I would test. But I want to very quickly realize, is this going down a dead end? So how would I decide that? Well, I'd go into the menus and see what other options there are for payments more than just making a payment, right? I'd look and see, can I schedule a payment for later and then change the payment date? Can I go through and see past transactions and change them in some way? Can I generate statements? Like, I'm not just thinking the one, make a payment, receive a payment. I'm trying to think of that, like, infrastructure around that. And you'll see quite often when I talk about my process, I'm actually really thinking about business logic, because that's primarily what I hack. I hack business logic. I'm very much somebody who looks at what's in front of me. Now, there is one kind of tool here that I'm a really big fan of, which is Kite Runner. So if you hack APIs like I do a lot, RESTful APIs are kind of unique in the sense that they not necessarily have like shared endpoints. So you think about your traditional Recon, you might go and look for every PDF document associated with the domain on Google and hope it was indexed. But for something like an API endpoint, you can't really do that because the way an API works is very different and we need separate resource names. So for me, when I'm actually testing, this is by far the best automated tool for RESTful API testing. You do have to test RESTful APIs manually, to be honest, but this is the best option. And I primarily like to use Burp, to be honest, for all my stuff, but I really recommend Kite Runner. Now, one thing I do a lot is I try not to compete on assets. So I target mobile apps a lot. Am I an expert in mobile apps? No. But just having Burp working on your device or emulator. So I use an old iPad Mini 4 that I got on Facebook for cheap because it was damaged. And I don't really care that the screen's broken and the back has gotten holes in it because it's just, for me, it's just about hacking, right? So I jailbreak it, I bypass the SSL pinning, and now I can see the traffic from my iPad. So that already puts me in a situation where I'm not going to be competing with a lot of people. I'm mainly going to be competing with, mobile hackers, and they are far too busy to do the same stuff I'm doing with like their Frida and their other things. So those other tools like Frida Trace, which lets you kind of look at what the apps are doing under the hood, that's really useful for kind of understanding, when certain libraries are called, what libraries are called. And honestly, the hardest part of mobile hacking is writing exploits. This takes time, but it can really set you apart from the competition. Like, genuinely good mobile hackers are like really hard to find, and platforms want them as well because people want to test their mobile apps. So I am very much thinking, okay, I'm not going to compete hacking, subdomains, right? And looking for subdomain takeovers. I'm really much looking for unique assets, unique vulnerabilities. And because I'm starting at the start of Invite, when the program launches or very soon afterwards, I'm very much trying to get those unique findings. So step 4 is hacking. So these are the 4 main bugs that I look for. And these are my most recent bugs as well. So my first one is permission issues. All types of IDORs, unauthenticated, authenticated, permission hierarchies. I've done so much content on IDORs, but they're really good vulnerabilities, especially if you're not that technical, or you're like me and prefer the business logic side of hacking rather than, the more kind of technical side of like seeing how JavaScript renders different potential XSS payloads. Business logic. So quite often I'm thinking, how do I skip over steps? Do I really need to put my payment information in? Just recently, I found a very similar bug where it was essentially like a store and I was able to add stuff to the store, but it wouldn't let me check out because it had like this different payment. But actually it literally in the URL said step 3. So I just changed step 3 to step 4. Sometimes it's quite as simple as that. Other times I've had to write more custom exploits, especially in combining this with things like race conditions, where I'm trying to abuse both the business logic and the race conditions to get a really interesting output. Source code reviews. So I've actually learned how to do this fairly recently, where I've been doing PHP Laravel source code reviews. So I'm really looking for unsafe functions. For something like Laravel, I'm looking at the middleware portion and seeing what endpoints have got and what middleware. Again, that's just API hacking by a different name. But again, it's that signing a source code review, which I think a lot of people get quite intimidated by. So for me, hacking, that's an asset for me because I don't want to be hacking the same thing as everyone else. And finally, mass assignment and really all API vulnerabilities. I've never put myself in a position where I wouldn't hunt for all API vulnerabilities because I get invited to a lot of API programs. And mass assignment is just a type of vulnerability where an API is too permissive. But as long as you know the what the column names are called in the database, you can assign columns you shouldn't be able to. Think changing someone else's password because you added password to a request. I'm focusing on low competition bugs, especially in private programs. These are what I do. You may not do this because you have a different way of hacking. But for me, these are ones I know I'm strong in. I want to jump on these ASAP so I don't dupe with people, right? That's primarily what I'm thinking is I don't want to get a duplicate. And a lot of the way I approach a private program is based in that lens. Now, pivoting. So the problem with hacking is that it's really easy to burn out. And I'm sure that people can tell you a lot of stories about burning out. And I'm not the first person to tell you this. But one thing that really is difficult about bug bounties where, if you were doing pen testing or maybe CTFs, it wouldn't necessarily be as bad, is that if you don't find anything, it can really feel like you're just an awful hacker and you just shouldn't be here or you shouldn't be hacking. You should be doing literally anything else because you're so bad at hacking. So pivoting is really helpful because it means that once you know how an application works from one target in scope, you apply it to another. And that can kind of give you that feeling of progression, but it's not necessarily dumping all of your time and going, right, well, I can't find anything. I'm done with this program. But it also isn't like, I can't find anything. There must be something here. It's just launched or I've just got rid of the invite. I've got to find something. And really to kind of generalize, a lot of findings require a lot of in-depth knowledge of a target, especially the things that I hunt for. I do have to know about a target. I do want to know how their API works and the columns in their database. I do want to know how their RESTful API is written. I'm constantly thinking, okay, how can I progress here? And really to kind of summarize here, the most difficult part of hacking is hacking. Hacking for different people, it's different, right? No two people will hack the same way. And even if you have a mentor and you collab with people, you won't necessarily always gel with them. I found that some of my best mentors are people who haven't necessarily found bugs for me, but have been really useful soundboards for me. And we have a really large community of other hackers. I think the one thing that I've always said has been positive about my experience in the community has been that I've always felt welcome, even though I came from mentorship and I hadn't done any hacking before, way before. This is in 2019. Even though I wasn't familiar with everything, people still welcomed me and gave me the time. And I'll be forever thankful that I had that experience before I had a toxic experience with the community. Even though hacking is hard, we can meet other hackers. Now, some people will be really fortunate that they know a lot of people IRL. Maybe they are in university and they have a university society. But, we're all on Twitter. We're on Twitter. We're on Discord. Join communities. Put yourself out there. It can be really challenging, especially as I think a lot of people are naturally quite introverted in security. But it's a fantastic learning experience, even if it's just kind of being silent in a Discord channel, just lurking and reading write-ups when they get posted. You've got a quality filter in another person. And, just to kind of validate how I think a lot of people feel, hacking is partly luck. Like, to find a bug, you need a combination of both skill and luck. And when you first start out, you're very much focusing on that luck element of like finding a part of it that isn't widely used, or about, finding a something that isn't properly configured with the web application firewall, for example. But as you improve, luck is less of a factor. So someone like me, what I'm doing is I know what works for me, and I know the kinds of target that work for me. So I'm putting that together and choosing targets that I think will work very well for me. And I'm making that decision really, really quickly, so I'm not spending time on it. And, the pros have developed speciality. That's how you get consistency, and, it's that knowledge to completely flip that luck element around, where it's mostly skill and a little bit of luck. And especially when you start thinking about crits, to look at the purely financial aspect of it, once you keep finding crits, you don't need to hack as much for the same reward, right? Because you're just getting higher bounties. So I think it's really important to recognize that, especially if you're just getting started. And finally is reporting. I cannot stress how much a good report helps. And actually working at a bug bounty platform myself now and seeing reports, I really respect the amount of effort that goes into reporting now and what makes it so great. If there's no need for a back and forth between you and triage, it makes it so much easier for like a customer to come along, or like the target itself to come along and go, oh yeah, we understand the impact here. Having that clear description of impact relates it to the business concerns. A really easy way of doing it is like if you're dealing with a specific industry like health, changing your language to represent that. So we might think of people as users, but for a health company, they might be thinking of people as patients. So it's really important to change our language to that one in order for us to kind of be taken not more seriously, but to be speaking the same language almost. Like we're not speaking two different languages, we're speaking the same language, we care about their stuff. And don't insult people. Don't insult people, even if the outcome isn't ideal for you, it doesn't help. Like, arguing also doesn't really help. You can be direct and you can be firm, but you don't need to insult people, you don't need to be aggressive, and it actually makes it much more difficult to get a good outcome for you. But why does impact matter? Impact tells us we found something interesting. So the issue here is there is a plane crash. Okay, that's bad, but there's quite a big range of impacts there. Did it hit a house? Did it hit, a random field? Was everyone okay? Like, did it crash, but ultimately it just had like a bad landing? Did it crash near an airport? All of that is the impact, but the issue is still the same. And that's kind of a core idea you structure your report around. When I think about impact, I'm always relating everything I do back to that impact. Bug bounty platforms, sad it is, aren't there to throw money at us. They want to protect their customers, their reputation, their organizations from malicious individuals. So you've got to speak their language and talk in the same way. And I think what's important here is that programs get a lot of report, and a lot of them aren't security issues. So of the Shopify engineering, this was in March, I think 2019, 62 reports were not applicable. So they might be seeing a lot more not applicable reports than genuine reports. Now, a lot of reports can get misidentified as not applicable or, lower than they should be. And that's really where impact comes in. Focus on business impact, fully explain the bug, clear reproduction steps, not a video that's all blurry and no one can read it, not a video where your screen's like way too big and no one can read any of the text, and it's having those screenshots as additional material to really explain how things work. And I think here are my kind of good advice here for what I think makes a good report. Clear, concise writing. If you're not a native speaker, just try your best. Maybe get a friend to give your writing a second look. Maybe if you have parents, asking them to give it a second look. The best you can do is a picture tells 1,000 words here. If you are struggling to express yourself, include pictures, include videos, try your best. You have to explain a vulnerability on the customer's terms. How does it affect their users? How does it affect the people they care about? You've got to have that clear POC, steps to exploit. Bonus points if you include a one-click exploit. I think they are really useful for just being able to go, oh yeah, that's a vulnerability, done. And I have seen that get a bonus before as well. Be polite to triagers. Being rude, yelling at them, your bug's not going to get triaged any faster because you yelled at them. Just be professional. If you need to be firm, don't be aggressive. And don't make assumptions. Don't assume the triager knows everything about an asset or what it does. They could have literally just been assigned this ticket randomly, or that they know about every bug in existence. You might know more than the triager, because this is your findings. Now, this is it from me. I hope this has been a useful talk here about how I hunt for bugs and how I approach this problem. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Bye, everyone.